Dear participant here on site or online, welcome. Welcome to this great discussion. We wanted to have this panel really looking at what stands in the COP28 Declaration that was signed earlier this year, end of last year, in fact, to really highlight the importance of countries and other partners in relation to what could be done further in terms of building together strong, resilient agriculture, sustainable food system, and climate action to address those forthcoming challenges. I'm Ben Rivoire from the ISF team, and I'm happy to lead one of the working group dedicated to sustainability, the Environmental Social Responsibility Working Group. Within the seed industry, this topic has also become a very important element, and we want to showcase both from individual companies' initiative with the diversity we know within the seed industry, either from crop type, from the different companies or organization structure from different parts of the world, how we can together as seed industry work together, commit, and plan the next step on those sustainability topics. So together with this ISF working group that was established 2 years ago, we really want to gather those experts that will bring this knowledge and expertise to the discussion from the seed industry perspective. But alone is not the only thing, because we need to partner and we need to collaborate and we need to work with other partners along the agri-food value chain. It's broad, it's a lot of different actors involved, to the end consumers or to the final user of agricultural product at large. The purpose of this panel today is really to dig into what this declaration is about, why more than 150 member states signed it, to commit further to take action in relation to those topics to build together sustainable agriculture, resilient food system, and climate action. But within this declaration, there is a clear call to action for private actors and beyond to also take some action, be more active, be more visible, to explain what we are already doing and what we want to do next to really have some concrete, tangible, achievable changes within our industry that will impact the full ecosystem at large. This is the reason why within this panel we have a quite diverse range of expertise from within the industry, but also other organizations we work with, where we want also to identify those elements where we could be a bit more active, where we can also set up some challenging new targets and objectives, and that's the purpose of this discussion today. So please enjoy the discussion, contribute to the discussion today or tomorrow, and we'll be happy to continue this journey together on a sustainable path for the seed industry and for all the agricultural and agri-food system in general. Jean-Paul, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Ben, and warm round of applause for Ben, please.
Thank you.
Thank you, Ben. Who's heard of the COP? Quick raise of hands. Okay, and who's heard of the Emirates Declaration? Yeah, a few less hands. And I think that's precisely why there was an Emirates Declaration trying to look at, agriculture and food systems in the context of the negotiations around climate change actions, because there was a perception by these 150 countries that signed this Emirates Declaration that agriculture and food systems were a little bit under the radar of these general negotiations. So this show of hand, in a way, reflects why this Emirates Declaration is there, and this is what we will be discussing very much in this panel. I would like then to introduce our panelists. We have Jason Allarding from Syngenta Seeds, Head of Sustainability, and he's also the chair of the coordinating group at ISF on Environment and Social Responsibility. We have Frank Baghidi. He is a non-resident expert at the UNFCCC. We have Saskia Nuijten. She is the communications officer at EIT Food and very much involved also in this Emirates Declaration. We have Kelly Racette. She is sustainability scientist for agriculture and food systems at the Nature Conservancy. And last but not least, Jorge Fernandez Vidal. He is head of agriculture and investments at the Liechtenstein Group and also Racette. A warm round of applause for our panelists. So I'd like to start with the Emirates Declaration itself, and maybe those who have been the closest to it. Maybe Saskia, I'll give you the floor first. You were really part of the pavilion there that was really working to build this Emirates Declaration. Can you tell us something about why you felt it was important to have this Emirates Declaration and why you think it will be important for the whole agricultural system moving forward?
Okay, thank you. I do have to make a small challenge to what you said. We did not create the declaration, of course. What we did very much was, as EIT Food, we were involved very strongly in the food systems partnership. So what we have been working on for years is to get actually food systems as part of the discussions at these international climate debates at COP. In the past, the focus was mostly on agriculture, but food systems obviously have a very big impact on the whole climate. And if we want to make progress in our climate solutions, in the debate that we feel food systems need to be included. And together, as this partnership, we have been working really hard to get food systems into the discussion. And with this year, or last year's, I should say, last year's declaration by the Emirates, it was not just agriculture that was mentioned, it was actually agriculture and food systems. And we believe that this is really a big step forward.
Okay, brilliant. And Frank, I mean, you were also part of, building this. What kind of hope do you see with this Emirates Declaration? What lies in it that gives guidance and direction for the whole value chain?
Yeah, thank you for this question. I don't know, I think oftentimes people look at those declarations and they're like, nothing will come out of it. Oftentimes they're right. But I think the most important point with this one is the signal that it is sending. I've been attending climate COPs for a long time now. And there was definitely a before and after the Paris Climate COP, right? Particularly for the energy sector. And a lot of us, people in the room, particularly on the private sector side, have had to have a sustainability strategy after that, have had to have net zero target after that. What this declaration is going to do is pretty similar, but for agri-food systems. So, right, there's going to be a before and after. In Dubai for COP28, before Dubai, we've never had a food, agriculture, and water day. We've never had a specific declaration focusing on agri-food systems. And most importantly, at the end of the COP28 negotiations, in the final agreement, they specifically and explicitly mentioned sustainable agriculture, and they acknowledged it as part of the solution to protect climate change. Now, it sounds like very kind of like small bits and pieces that are not so specific yet, but they eventually become specific. And the way for them to become specific is that both Ben and you have mentioned the 159 countries that have endorsed the declaration. Eventually, those countries, they take it home and they update their national action on the climate side, on their planning side. They update their NDCs, their nationally determined contributions. They update their NBSAPs on the biodiversity side. So that means that it automatically translates into very specific domestic agricultural targets that they are going to design and devise between now and COP30 in Brazil next year. And so understanding that we basically have a 2-year window where a lot of advocacy work needs to be done, a lot of technical support needs to be given to policymakers so that they push for the right policies that can advance the seed sector and take it to a more sustainable side.
Okay, thank you. I mean, I have read the declaration. It is indeed a declaration. It's definitely not a strategy, okay? And I think that's where I would like to go next, because it's true that it's not a blueprint for a country to say, this is what I'm going to do to develop sustainable agriculture. I noted one point in there where it says that, one of the objectives is to maximize the climate and environmental benefits while containing and reducing harmful impacts associated with agriculture and food systems. One thing I should note as well is the declaration doesn't actually specifically mention seed anywhere. So my question to you, Jason, is what does a sustainable food system, agricultural system look like for you? And in particular, how different is it to what exists today? Because obviously when we're talking about a transformation, it means that today we're not sustainable enough. So can you please tell us what it looks like for you?
Yeah, thank you, Jean-Paul. And yeah, it's a great question, because it's actually, as we've come together as an industry, and also individual companies in the seed sector, this has been a challenge for us. And thinking back to the declaration itself and what my colleagues have just mentioned, the fact that sustainable agriculture and food systems, resilient food systems are all in the same declaration is a very powerful call to action for us, in part to start answering your question. That shows, that pivot in terms of how the declaration has been positioned, shows that what we already know is true, which is that the seed sector is firmly part of that food system. And for a lot of reasons, we have not always been as visible as part of the contribution that we make. But what it does is it demonstrates the fact that we cannot be, having the luxury of being in silos with other parts of the food system. And it's a call to action that talks about the foresight from one part of the food chain feeding into what we do in the seed sector to help us make the right decisions. So it's fundamentally really us thinking differently about the things that we already do very well in the seed sector. We breed for yield and performance, but we also have to think about now, what are the impacts? How do we reduce the impacts of those things? We've thought a lot about regenerative agriculture and how we leverage that within our industry, but how do we begin to regenerate soil and nature in a meaningful way that is visible and also creating demand and aligned with what the rest of the value chain is looking for? There are also social aspects of the declaration. How do we embed those, rural prosperity and effective rural communities, smallholders into that system? So I think, just to summarize, it's a call to action to help us in very specific terms with time-bound measures. I know a lot of people don't read these declarations, or maybe they don't go anywhere. But at this moment in time, it's a very powerful call to action for us to think outside of our silo and to position ourselves in a much more, leaning in much more into our role in the value chain.
Okay, so to go in away from a very business-to-business approach, more into some kind of business-to-society approach for the seed sector. Jorge, what does a sustainable food system look like for you, and how different is it from what we have today?
I think, thanks for the question. I think it's multiple things, right? Sustainable is probably an element of economic sustainability, so it needs to be profitable, and it needs to be profitable for farmers, and it needs to be profitable for industry players. And I think this is relevant because at the end of the day, when we talk about sustainability, we first forget about that aspect, and I think it is important to have that always in mind. Second, it needs to be obviously environmentally sustainable, and we always need to find ways to reduce our footprint, or perhaps develop the science or the emerging know-how to communicate well what is the actual footprint of the agricultural industry, which I think is misunderstood. And then probably the third leg is more about people, and just making sure that that is a system that corrects some of the issues that we have today, like labor issues, or I guess more social aspects of agriculture that need to improve. So I think it's working across those three dimensions and trying to address the problems that we have in each of those three pillars, which are very different in different geographies or in different crops.
Okay, thank you. And Kelly, what would be your view on this? How different does it look like from what we have today?
Yeah, I think echoing a lot of what others have already said, I think that an ideal food system is one that's working in harmony with nature and communities. It's going beyond minimizing harm even to actually restore nature and to reverse some of the damage that we've done as humans to our planet. But I don't know that it always looks that different from what's going on today on individual farms. There are a lot of producers out there who are already making changes to achieve those goals, who have already tried to optimize their systems to achieve some of the economic and environmental benefits that we've been talking about already. So I think that there's a lot that we can learn from those folks, and we just need to start talking about scaling. How do we make that the reality for every producer?
Okay, so we're talking about scaling up things that are already existing today. There are good models out there. At the same time, there seems to be policy expectations that might be uncomfortable actually for some businesses. And I wonder if I can go back to Saskia, because we're talking about policy expectations, but then there's also a market mechanism whereby farmers and growers have certain expectations. The whole value chain has certain expectations. Are these expectations necessarily aligned with those of policymakers? I mean, is there like a harmony there, or on the contrary, is there a risk that these expectations are completely different?
Well, it's an excellent question and a difficult one to answer. But I think if you look at the whole scope of things, you indeed have policymakers, but policymakers are also part, if you look at it, of the food system. So what we need to do is have policymakers, industry, etc., work together, talk together, and not see them as completely unrelated elements within a system. So I think my colleague here also already said this in his first answer. We now have a period where we can also help policymakers, help national regulators, the people that are working on these national plans that need to bring in what we need in 2 years' time, to come up with the right solutions, with the right actions. So it's not so much of do policymakers understand our business or what, it's also an opportunity to work with them and to bring things together. And new models will bring challenges to maybe some of the business models that are out there, but they will also bring opportunities for new business models. If we take, for instance, regenerative agriculture, which Jason just, I think, mentioned, that also brings in new models, new finance models, new business models. I'm not going to pretend I'm a bigger seed expert than the people here in the room, but it would also bring opportunities, because what are the best seeds for such farming techniques, for new climate conditions? I think there's a lot that can be done by the sector in moving forward.
Yeah, and what you're pointing to, in a way, is also the leadership. I mean, there's a political leadership in the declaration, but what you're saying is that the value chain can respond with its ideas, and so that's the way that the expectations can align with policymakers. But then, Frank, I mean, how would that work in practice? Because we're also working in a broader society. I mean, it can't be the value chain that sort of decides. How can the value chain convince policymakers that its approach is the right one? What are the ingredients that is required?
I think the first one is be present, right? We know that those climate COPs are taking place every year, and we know that all of the key players are there for 2 weeks to discuss those topics, both off the record and on the record. What is going to be particularly interesting both this year for COP29 in Azerbaijan and next year for COP30 in Brazil is the fact that you're going to see a lot more of those conversations around agriculture and around agri-food systems. Even already in Dubai, I was hearing conversation around specifically maximum yield seeds, around drought tolerant seeds, around flood resistant seeds, and all of this was because of the declaration. It triggered all those conversations and it put them to the forefront. There is an opportunity to help policymakers draft those policies, and if you don't do it, what happens is kind of like the opposite, right? You don't proactively engage, so then you play catch up because they do it for you, and then you just end up complaining because it's not what you wanted. There is a strong willingness for a lot of them, and as part of my day-to-day job with Eurasia Group, I always interact with a lot of those country delegations to learn more about the sector, to figure out what works and what doesn't work. To Kelly's point, to kind of also look for those pilot programs that they can scale up and that they could mainstream, to figure out win-win solutions. And that's something that is kind of like very hard to get to when you don't have a in-depth understanding of the knowledge. So those partnerships between value chain actors and policymakers are not just important, they're necessary to get us to where we want to be. And I always say at this point, that train is already moving, right? The idea that the vast majority of the world has done what needed to be done in terms of the target setting for the energy sector, and that we now need to fully kind of like focus on agri-food systems, that chapter has started. So now it's about, you know, filling up the blanks, and that means working hand in hand with policymakers at the local, national, and international level to make that happen. Maybe one last point here is that oftentimes with those declarations, you don't see some of the big players endorsing it, but this one has both US and China on it. So that kind of tells you that in this world of geopolitical chaos, there was a large consensus on the topic, which makes me say with a very high level of confidence that this is here to stay. So we're better off figuring out what can big actors or big players or big industry associations, what can ISF do in that context versus complaining about it and wait for it to happen without us being involved.
Okay, so that's in a way on the process. I'd like to get a little bit closer to the seed now and the expectations on the seed sector in this context. So number one, what are actually the main expectations that the seed sector can actually deliver when it comes to, you know, reaching more sustainable food systems? Are we looking at things like nutrition? Is this like the key driver? Are we looking at things like yield? Are we looking at things like climate change adaptation? What are the main expectations? Maybe we can start with you, Jorge.
Yes, so maybe a bit of a controversial comment first. I think it's good we acknowledge that nobody really knows how to solve the problem that we have. I think that policymakers are extremely lost, and so is everyone in the industry, particularly anyone that sits in Europe and is trying to figure out, you know, what to do with reporting and how to figure out a good way of addressing some of the main goals of the declaration. I think we're all lost, and I think the sooner we all admit that and try to look for collective solutions, the better off we are. And so that speaks to probably two things. One is we have to keep doing what we're doing, and I think it's yield, it is nutrition, it's climate resiliency. I mean, at the end of the day, we need to give performance, but we also need to lower environmental footprint, and we need to make sure that we develop seeds that can adapt to a changing environment, even though we don't know what that changing environment looks like. And so I think it needs the second vertical, which is involve all the people that work, you know, outside of the industry or within the industry, try to find other innovations, other solutions, other technologies that can help us solve a problem that we as an industry cannot solve. And so I think you're seeing now a lot of seed companies, and in particularly Racette within our portfolio, they are taking a look outside to try to see how other technology providers, developers, how other innovators can help us do what we cannot naturally do. And so I think it's more about, you know, building up on our competitive advantage, what we know how to do well, which is, you know, excellent breeding, but also looking at outside the industry to solve an extremely challenging problem.
Okay, so basically a little bit of everything with continued innovation and technology. Kelly, what would be your main expectations on the seed sector?
Yeah, I think innovation is definitely critical. Innovation is already the heart of this industry, and so I think it's very important to lean in. But I might also challenge to think a little bit outside of the box. I think there's other ways that this industry can really meaningfully contribute to achieving some of our goals that were laid out by the declaration. There's a lot to be said about your own footprint. So not just thinking about how do we use seed technologies to reduce the footprint of producers, but also what is the footprint of the seed industry's operations. I think this is often overlooked in these conversations, and there's a lot that we could be doing to kind of advance that work. We actually have a project with some seed organizations here that we're looking at using some of these sustainable agricultural practices in seed production, and it's maybe not as easy to just apply as we thought it might be. So I think there's still a lot of questions about how do we effectively use regenerative and sustainable agriculture within seed replication and seed production, as well as how do we then create seeds that can be compatible with those systems. The other piece I would say is that there's a lot of interest in maintaining our genetic stocks, so looking at preserving areas where we look to for additional diversity in our breeding lines. I think that there could be a lot of excitement about protecting some of these natural areas where we can find that diversity so that we can continue to go there to innovate in the future, and in the meantime also protect a little bit of nature.
Okay, yeah, because in the middle there you're talking about, in a way, a sort of a giant life cycle assessment of seed, in a way, that would take on board all operations. That would be quite an interesting project, actually. I don't know, maybe it happens at the level of individual companies. Jason, how do you see the main expectations on your sector to deliver here?
I mean, I think it's a powerful, again, I said before, opportunity. You know, over 3/4 of the Earth's population were represented by the 159 countries that signed off on the Declaration. So those countries have people that need to eat, and they need reliable food chains to address current challenges we have for hunger today, but for the growing populations of the future. And you know, a reliable food chain depends on effective technology and effective reliability from seed. It all starts with seed. And you know, the assumptions that those countries will make about ensuring that they have the food to feed their population comes from that entire chain. You know, and if the seed sector can contribute technology, and we heard from Jorge, that's more resilient, reliable, can continue to satisfy the growing needs of those populations, even through climate change, extreme weather events, all those things, then that gives the seed sector a powerful platform to engage policymakers. And I would encourage all of us in the seed sector to have a much louder, more aligned voice as we have those conversations with policymakers, and this declaration is the perfect moment to do that. I'll talk more, hopefully I'll have the chance to talk more about this later on, but that's well aligned with what my colleagues that I have conversations with across the sector are already thinking. It just gives us kind of a lightning rod to consolidate that message in a more powerful way. You know, it starts with seed, and the dependence that those populations will have for food supply also starts with seed.
Okay, there's one thing that I was boarding a plane actually recently, and it was written on the side of the plane, "Born to be sustainable." And you know, there is this feeling that you have to be sustainable as a business, right? You wouldn't go out there and say, "I'm not sustainable. None of my products are sustainable." And so you get this feeling that businesses necessarily see themselves as sustainable in the future. And I just wonder, I mean, is that fair? I mean, won't there be a challenge, nevertheless, to some business models in this context, that some business models will actually disappear, and we have to accept that some companies that are here today will not be there in the future? Maybe, Saskia, you can have a go at that. I mean, do we have to accept that some business models have to disappear in this transformation or evolution?
I think yes, at some point. But let's also not forget that that will not be tomorrow. It's also a journey that you need to go through. So it's not like one business model and then suddenly another business model. It's a journey that the industry together needs to work on. But it doesn't mean that the industry might need to change completely. I don't know, I think the people here will know better than me. You are from the seed industry and I'm not. But yeah, to progress, sometimes you need to leave some things behind. To progress, you can take good things with you. It doesn't mean that everything needs to be left behind. And some things actually fit very well in this new sustainable future that we are all working hard on to achieve.
But are there things that have been left behind? Jorge, maybe just as an example, you know, there probably have already been evolutions that might inform the future as well, like things that have been left behind to already be where we are today.
So I definitely think that there are many things we will stop doing. But at the end of the day, we talk about a net zero, which means that, you know, as long as there's somebody sequestering, there's some other people that can emit. So it's hard to say, you know, if we actually need every single business to be sustainable. I don't think we do. Some business models are going to be are going to have a a negative environmental footprint, but there are elements of the value chain that we will need nonetheless. So we will keep. So certainly there are many things that will change. I think what's a certainty to me is that all of us will be required to continue delivering more with less. And so whereas before, as an industry, our main concern was about providing a yield increase, now we know that we need to do so while reducing our environmental footprint. And so I think, all of the different business models will transform somehow. Some of them will manage to do so more rapidly or will become actually purely sustainable. I think we will have still a lot of businesses that by definition will not be sustainable, but we will acknowledge as an industry that we need them for us to maintain the system together. I mean, I think technology can get you as far. What gets me excited about our industry in particular is I think we have sufficient sources of sequestration to defend that as an industry we will definitely be net zero. But there will be elements within the industry with a negative footprint that we will necessarily want to maintain.
Thanks. And Kelly, would you imagine that some business models will have to disappear in what you see today when we look at agricultural and food systems?
Yeah, I think to echo Saskia, probably yes is the short answer. But looking forward, I think what will be really important is to find new ways, to find new value in some of the things that we're doing as an industry. And this is something that I think all industries are grappling with. How do we create business models that value nature differently? Because in the past we have not done that. We've sort of externalized the value of nature, and we've externalized the cost to nature of the activities that we have within our businesses. And so I think moving forward, we're going to have to turn that on its head a little bit. We're going to have to think about ways to make nature and the restoration of nature valuable, not only for producers, but for the larger food system and all of the businesses within it.
And if I go back to Frank then, because I think these kinds of questions can affect the quality of value chain collaboration. If there are parts of the value chain that feel that the evolution or the transformation ahead of them will basically eliminate them, they might feel, a little bit fearful of engaging in that conversation. If they feel that they can lead the conversation, it's very different. And you're already making the parallel with the energy sector and what's coming with the agricultural area. Can you say something about how that might affect this value chain collaboration? And again, thinking about the seed sector's role in that.
Yeah, I mean, if we bring it home to the seed sector, I think that the unique position of the sector is the fact that you have players and market participants that do interact quite often with all of the actors across the value chain, right? Whether it's the farmers, the processors, the distributors, the retailers, and oftentimes those interactions are just for like day-to-day business. And now it's about elevating those interactions to bring that element of global climate negotiations and ensuring that all those players are speaking with one voice when they engage on those kind of like international platforms. I find that because, as you were mentioning, when we talk about the seed sector, we talk about the step number one, there is an opportunity here with the market intelligence that the sector keeps on gathering on a daily basis and this ability to know who's who and who are the folks who would be able to interact and who would be willing to collaborate to make that happen and to turn that into a reality come the next climate COP. I just want to say something regarding this whole point around can a business be sustainable or not sustainable, because it's linked to how the seed sector could help. Oftentimes, and the way things are going right now, we keep on kind of like every year breaking the record in terms of like the hottest year on record. That was the case last year, that's going to be the case this year, most likely next year as well. You don't really have a choice but to be, right? And most farmers are already doing this because they don't necessarily have a choice. I think to me the problem is more so dealing with the physical pressures and then the political pressures and then the geopolitical pressures. That's what kind of like makes it all the more complicated for each of the players. And then the real question becomes, who has that responsibility? That burden oftentimes doesn't fall on the right people or is not shared equally amongst the market participants. And that's really the problem. And that's something that came up in many conversations that we've had since the beginning of the Congress. How do we make sure that it is not that the burden is not overwhelmingly on farmers, but that it is more evenly distributed across the value chain. And then it's much easier for folks to come up with that joint voice and those joint talking points and to engage with policymakers in a constructive fashion, whether it's at COP29 or at COP30.
Okay, brilliant. Are there any questions, comments in the audience? Any trigger points in anything so far? Questions, comments? Yes, we have one here. I can jump down, no problem.
Hi, Dave Armstrong, current chair of the American Seed Association. So one thing that strikes me, I was recently at the Ag Tech Summit in San Francisco, actually I think it was in March, and all the discussion about technology across the agricultural value chain has to run up against the reality that it's a highly fragmented value chain. I mean, incredibly fragmented. Data is also stovepiped. There's this whole question of interoperability and access to data. And it struck me, you had the brightest brains in the room, you had VC, you had the big tech companies, you had huge food companies, growers, you name it, they were all there. And the most basic things of aligning the ag food chain still remain elusive, right? So just kind of framing the reality of that in the context of what we're trying to achieve here with sustainability in agriculture. It seems a potentially very heavy lift until agriculture kind of can start to work across that value chain in a better way. So I don't know if you have thoughts on that challenge.
Yeah, and I imagine that fragmentation looks very different in different parts of the world as well.
Very much in the developed world, it's very bad as well.
Yeah, but it will, qualitatively speaking, it will look very different in every part of the world, in any case. Who wants to quick react? I mean, I see several. Yeah. Shall we start here with Jorge, please?
I'm going to say that, ironically, while it is true that it's heavily fragmented, it's also, when you compare it across industries, one with, I'm going to say, perhaps with the exception of airlines, the highest level of concentration. I mean, if you think about the trading front, I mean, we even invented the ABCD to talk about industry concentration in a way that is politically correct. When you think about the degree of concentration in the chemical industry, I'm going to say it's unparalleled when you compare it with other industries. When you think about the degree of concentration, particularly in the Western world, I think there is an inevitable trend towards larger farms, and this is certainly true of the US. So while I think that there's a lot of complexity, I also think that you can probably, if you start thinking about value chains, you can probably identify 5 to 10 companies with sufficient power within their specific verticals to drive change. So I agree that there is a lot of fragmentation if you think of the industry as a whole, but if you start cutting that into sub-verticals, I think you see a pretty phenomenal trend of concentration historically. And you name it, tractors, I mean, we can probably start going through the value chain and think about that. And if you think about technology, what you're also seeing is that while there are a lot of technological innovations out there, there is a strong incentive to gain economies of scale fairly quickly if you want to survive. And so I also think that what we're going to see on the technological front is that element of natural vertical integration to be able to work with the big players in the industry. So I think that if you probably stop thinking about the industry as a whole, but start looking at individual verticals, you find more hope because there's a very strong economic incentive to gain scale in our industry. Otherwise, you die. And so I think that compared to other industries, we do have a problem, but not as big as others do. But I can be wrong about my reading here.
Maybe another reading from Jason would be interesting.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's a great point, and I mentioned before, this is definitely something that the ISF members are noting on the seed sector side, and we talked previously about innovation, and the call for innovation. I think increasingly, innovation and ability to collaborate is actually going to be key. And those players who recognize where they cannot alone within that vertical or even the horizontal side differentiate themselves and grow and flourish, I think those companies are going to have a leg up. And I'm happy to say that at least at the ISF conversations we've had, we want to enable the members here to be able to ramp up that by creating natural platforms for collaboration. It starts with awareness. It starts with, yes, there are verticals and horizontals here. It starts understanding what the next vertical is and the next and how they fit together on the horizontal plane. I think that's really critical. So I think it's an important realization, but it's also a continued call for action for us. And again, at the individual company level, those who are most able to actively collaborate across those lines, those borders, will be more successful. And that's how innovation is going to, I think, we'll have to look in the future.
Another reaction? Yeah, please.
If so I absolutely agree, but I also think there's another element that can be very helpful, and that is there are already platforms for cooperations. And yeah, I'm gonna tell a little bit about EIT Food now, because it's, but that is actually also what we do. So we are a community, and we are supported by the European Union, and our mission and our goal is actually to bring the different players across the value chain together and innovate together. So really inclusive systems innovation. And of course, we are not the only one. So there are other initiatives out there, but it's definitely true. The food value chain is very, very fragmented. But there are also, cooperations, communities already out there where you can actively reach out across the value chain and work with other parties in the value chain.
And if I can just then go a little bit further, let's take EIT Food as a kind of ecosystem. How much is the seed sector involved in EIT Food?
Unfortunately, not much. So that's also why I'm here today. I'm also really hoping that the food sector will become more active in EIT Food. We talk a lot about, well, not on this stage, but in a lot of conferences everywhere, there's a lot of talk about from farm to fork. But the step before farm is also very important. And this step we really want to have in our community. So I do see a lot of opportunities for the seed sector to be active. It's not that we've never funded projects in the past. We've done some things with, and I need to have a little look, but with fava beans together with Racette and Nestle and the University of Cambridge and our tours. So, and we are very active in the scope of regenerative agriculture, not from the seed perspective, but that is definitely something that needs to be brought in and that can be brought in by you here. So please also approach me or later one of my colleagues via online or whatever, but we would love to see a very active cooperation with the seed sector.
Okay. Any questions, comments from the audience? Yeah, we have one at the back. I'll jump out of the stage. Please briefly introduce yourself.
Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Andrea. I'm the Secretary General for the World Farmer Organization. I still a new question about data and the data part, but I will stay true to my original one. So part of the panel today was discussing about sustainable and regenerative, regenerative outcome. A lot is requested today to farmers in terms of measuring data, and who bears the cost and where these data go is still a bit unclear to farmers. We had an interesting conversation with several of our members. We represent 55 countries, 81 organizations. It was surprising that someone from, let's say, global north and someone from the global south was expressing the same concern. In an arena in which there are more than 130 private software that support farmer management and decision support system, there is much more trust in government collecting data rather than private sector collecting data, because feels that farmers are giving data and they are not receiving or they're receiving very little for their effort. And even more now that we are talking about a road towards sustainable, that means sustainable outcomes, that means measurement, who along the value chain will also support farmers in this? And it's reasonable to ask to bear a shared cost for this part. That's my comment on, and I say share question to the panel. And the last one is your thought on the multiplication of the COP event. We have 3 times this year in which agriculture might be in the Cali, Colombia on biodiversity, and might touch a lot on the seed security part. In Baku is not exactly clear how agriculture will play a role, but for sure in the COP30 will be paramount. And then we have also desertification in Riyadh that will touch water, and maybe water use efficiency will also be a new paramount for farmers in the future. Thank you.
Okay, thank you very much. I'd like to hear maybe Kelly first on the role of the farmer, how to manage this data sharing within the value chain.
Yeah, I think it's a really great question and definitely a valid concern. I think, you know, it's a difficult challenge to solve because of what I was talking about earlier and the way that we kind of create the value within our food system today. There's not a lot of value that's placed on this data at this moment, especially when it comes to measuring the environmental benefits of doing certain farming practices and the willingness of the farmer to communicate that data up through the value chain. I think that we have an opportunity to change that, though. If we look at our business models and maybe create some ways that the farmer can derive more value from sharing that information and collecting that information, that can go a long way to establishing some trust among the community. I think also that as a scientist, I love data. I also love models. So I think that we can do a lot to sort of simplify the data that we need to collect from farmers to make it a little bit less sensitive, make it a little bit less burdensome for them, and still get to the quantification of those benefits that we need to ensure that we actually are traveling in the right direction by applying these regenerative agriculture practices or sustainable practices.
Okay, so maybe some kind of public research institute could give the confidence, I don't know, to share data. I don't see a lot of approval for that idea. Maybe Frank as well, you wanted to comment potentially on the multiplication of the COPs?
Yeah, no, great point. You're right, you're going to have the Biodiversity COP in October, the Climate COP in November, the Desertification COP in December. All 3 of them are going to have a huge focus on agri-food systems. I'm really glad you mentioned this point because I think it's completely overlooked at the moment. And it is not an exception, right? 2024 is not an exception. I think from this point onward, you're going to continue to see this kind of like relentless focus on those topics. And to link it to your previous point regarding data, already at COP28, just after the declaration was announced, we saw pledges that were amounting something like $7 billion, right? To kind of like implement some of the points that were mentioned in the declaration. Part of that includes science and data. And a lot of the issues that you raise in terms of data transparency or data governance or the responsibility or the revenue sharing processes, all of those things are basically question marks at the moment. So we need to figure out how to do this. This is the perfect time to have those conversations with value chain players to figure out what is the view of the sector to make it happen and turn that into a reality from at a national level, but also at a global level. So I think it's an excellent point. Everything regarding MRV, right, measurement, reporting, and verification, those are going to be very sensitive, very touchy conversations, particularly once you kind of like factor in the geopolitical tensions between the key players in that space. It will be critical for us to find a way to advance in a very safe and sound fashion when it comes to tackling data. So I really like that point. I don't think that there is a way out the multiplication of those COPs. I myself will have to attend all 3 of them. And I'm tired even just thinking about it. But I would also say those are opportunities to have ongoing engagements with the right folks. See, for most countries, they have the same delegation attending all 3 conferences. And so that means that basically 3 months back to back, you get to have meaningful conversations with the right players that can turn into actionable items that make sense to you and to your sector. I've seen the mining industry do that very well, particularly when it comes to the Biodiversity COP. And to Doug's point, I think that on the agri-food system side, we've yet to get to a point where there is that alignment. So I think figuring out our own internal kitchen is the number one thing to do before we kind of like go ahead and share our views with the world starting October with the Biodiversity COP.
Okay, thank you. Is there one more question, comment? No, we're good. I would like then to just wrap up now with the next steps in a way. I mean, we've talked about seed and we've talked about these slightly complex governance processes. So there are two things going on here that we have to understand: the role of seed, but at the same time, the role of seed in those different processes of value chain collaboration and, you know, influencing the future of what sustainable food systems will look like. So I will maybe start with Saskia. What would be sort of your key recommendation to ISF in particular in its work moving forward? They're clearly trying to build some kind of, you know, value chain collaboration. What would be your key recommendation and call to action for ISF?
Well, first of all, join us in the Food System Partnership. So not join EIT Food, although that would also be amazing, but join the Food System Partnership. Come to COP with us. Join the discussions. Secondly is, it's not just about the discussion, it's also about implementation and real actions. And also use your role as the foundation in the sector to already start discussing and start working on these actions and start working on these initiatives that will bring the declaration and the national plans to life. Because this is still a declaration, it's a piece of paper, and we need from all the different actors in the food system to come with the real actions and the real activities together with policymakers, together with national regulators, civil societies, etc.
Okay, thank you. Kelly, what would be your expectation of ISF? What should ISF be doing in terms of actions?
Yeah, I think I would agree with Saskia. We see a lot of promises in this space right now and not enough progress. So I think as much as ISF can help their members actually realize sustainable and regenerative food systems, you know, that's going to be the key, actually achieving practices and practice change on the ground. That's what we need to be doing as quickly as possible in order to achieve our climate and nature goals.
Okay, thank you. Jorge, what would be your expectation on ISF?
I think we have a very, as I said before, very difficult problem to solve as an industry. So I think providing a confidential and safe space where, you know, we can all talk about how we are doing things in different regions, different companies, different crops, different value chains. I think that's something that adds a lot of value. And for example, I have to say, even for us, for Racette, this has proven to be a fruitful Congress because we're learning how other players in the industry are doing from a very different perspective, things that we want to do. And so I think fostering that collaboration and offering that opportunity for us to learn from others, I think that's something that adds tremendous value.
Okay, thanks. And Frank, I mean, you've probably observed several industry sectors having to change. What would be your recommendation then to the International Seed Federation?
Yeah, don't do like them. Don't wait too long. No, I would say the first thing is kind of like I agree with Jorge's point, the consultation side. So figuring out all of the closed door sessions work that need to be done so that you can come up to those climate negotiations with an actual action plan and with a series of asks. I find that oftentimes a lot of the sectors that I cover, they do go to those climate negotiations in a very defense mode, right? And kind of like figure out a way to say, no, don't do this, don't do that, instead of saying, do this for me. Can you give me this? I need more of that. I need some subsidies. I need some tax incentives. And so flip the script a little bit, but that takes time and that takes a lot of effort. And so right now we have a few months to make that happen. So that would be one. Two would be present. So attend those and make your voice heard. And then I would say number three, there is an aspect of the conversation that we haven't mentioned yet, which is the tension between the global north and the global south, which is a fixture in climate negotiations. ISF can do a lot of work in terms of the push for technology transfer, particularly between those two blocks. That is going to also kind of like help ISF's position in terms of making their voice heard during those negotiations.
Okay, thank you very much, which leaves me to go to you now, Jason, because you're chairing the group that will be in charge of the next steps. So can you give us a sense of what those next steps might be, maybe reflecting on some of these recommendations as well, and how that will inform your work at ISF moving forward?
Yeah, thanks very much for that. And actually, my fellow panel members, excellent inputs to the mission that we have to deliver here. So I will note that and try to reflect back a little bit about that. I mean, I'll start by saying that the mission of the ESR group at the ISF is, to represent the seed sector in one voice to support more resilient and sustainable value chains. So this group of professionals from across the seed sector already came together with that notion in mind, which touches on comments that I heard just from all four of you in our previous conversations here. How are we doing that? I mean, I'll just really talk in sort of four spaces here. The first is around building that trust within the seed sector. It's very important, I think Jorge mentioned, around that confidential, safe space. But it's the trust that says we have the same vision, the same mission together, and where is that space on the horizontal line that we can operate across our sector? Where are we not operating in a competitor mode? Where can we collaborate to the betterment of our whole sector? I think that's the first part, so building trust. The second really is to generate the proof points needed. A lot of the conversations we're having about the seed sector impact and influence on the value chain overall is about proving that the sector has a contribution to make, that there's a legitimate, proven, data-driven impact already on that space, and that the sector has critical mass to influence it. So generate those proof points, and we've taken a number of actions to begin to build a directory, a digital toolbox, which we'll publish later, sharing a lot of that kind of information. The third is really for us to start to then upskill and build capacity amongst our members. Everyone comes from different places across the seed sector. It's an incredibly diverse sector. Even within that vertical line, how do we build up ourselves together to be the most effective influencers? And that's sharing information, that's creating reference points, and aligning on those things. And then taking all three of those pieces together, how do we then go outside of our sector and work across those different parts of the value chain with the knowledge, the trust, the alignment to have the maximum influence of the challenges of today, and probably more important, the foresight for the challenges coming tomorrow. We've agreed actions last week. We had a very energetic, exciting meeting. I'm very happy about where we got to. I hope the group was. A lot of actions have come underneath those categories.
Okay, well, I wish you luck then in this work. I mean, the dynamics of value chain collaboration can be complex, but you seem to be developing certain tools to help you through that. So I would like to give a warm round of applause to our 5 panelists. Thank you for your preparation time and for sharing your insights. Thanks to you for your engagement, and enjoy the rest of the Congress. Bye-bye.